If you're looking for a new way to support Side Mission, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. Make sure to use code SIDEMISSION for 15% off your order. Thank you, Dubby, for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by the boys, Kyle and Matt. And today, we're talking about episode 4 of Twisted Metal on Peacock. And I'm just going to shoot very, very straight with you folks. So we have already recorded this episode once before. And because of an audio issue, we are having to re-record. So this is a perfect chance for us to try to get this episode even better than the first time I think we can. So let's talk about this episode again, fellas. We were all, I think, pretty big fans of this episode. As far as talking about Twisted Metal, I'm not sure if it's any of our favorite episodes as far as where this show is right now. But I liked, and I know that we talked about this the first time, one of the things we talked a lot about was the fact that the writers and the show proved they could have an emotional, character-driven episode instead of it just being fast cars, action, and a bunch of, cussing and humor and all that. I think that this episode's a real turning point for the show, along with episode 3, whereas that kind of moved the main storyline forward. This one doesn't do a lot of that. It's more of a filler episode, but as I like to say, not all filler episodes are bad. So, Kyle, I'll start with you since you've watched the show 5 times through at this point. I've made that number up, by the way. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's my story, and I'm telling it the way I want. So, Kyle, we mentioned it. A lot of really good character moments in this episode. A lot of good emotional moments in this episode, particularly with John Doe and Quiet, who I think that Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatrice have really, really grown into these roles by this point in the show. Kind of, what were some moments from this episode that stuck out for you?
For me especially, I think that there's, so obviously right as the episode begins, we see them driving on the road at night, and they get picked up by the semis, who we find out, are this group called the Convoy, and the way that they have kind of made do is they have everything they need on their trucks, and it allows them to constantly stay moving and stay out of, one place for too long because people might find you, raid your settlement, all that stuff. But anyways, they give them this mission to go see the florist. And there was, I think, probably my favorite part of the episode was when they were driving to the florist to go see her, and John Doe and Quiet are talking about, kind of how John Doe got started as a milkman. And he said that, when he joined up, it was to survive. It wasn't because it was something he wanted to do. And he goes in to elaborate a little bit more about how a lot of milkmen end up dying really young. They all end up going out in, awful ways, and he wants to be the first one to die old, which is why he's doing all of this so that way he can get a place in New San Francisco. And I thought that that was a very humbling moment because this whole time we've kind of seen John Doe portray himself as a badass, as a fearless, motherfucker who didn't take any shit from anybody. And this was such a humanizing moment for him because it showed that, he is afraid of death. He isn't, just completely fearless. He doesn't want to die young. He wants to live an old life and go out peacefully. And that's not something that I think in a lot of shows or games or movies about the apocalypse, that's not something I've really thought about. Are these characters who end up, getting stuck in these jobs like, milkmen in Twisted Metal, who are probably going to end up going out on the road, dying to some, crazy vulture or psycho clown. But that was good. I thought that really took it away from, like you said, the nonstop cussing, the humor, and it gave us such a deep, connection with these characters.
I agree, and that's, again, I just go back to it where the writing, I was kind of worried about the writing with the first 2 episodes. I think I said that in our episode 3 review. I was kind of worried about the writing. I was kind of worried about the general direction because I was like, well, it's a lot of exposition, it's a lot of build-up. I'm not really seeing a clear picture. Well, episode 3 really helped with that. Now I needed to see more, I needed to see more character development, and this episode we see a lot of that. So let's talk a little bit more about the convoy. Matt, I've got a question for you about the convoy, and I want to hear your overall thoughts on it because I think it's a really, really intriguing concept of these people that just they stay in these semis. They're always moving. They're never in one place for that long. And you go into these semis, and it's a small civilization almost. So my question for you is: did that kind of remind you of your old living situation when you had 12 people living in a house meant only for 4?
Actually, yeah, I felt right at home when I saw the convoy. To be honest with you, all those people in one little compact place. Yeah, totally felt right at home. I do love the idea, especially because my dad was a truck driver. So
Was he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, when I was growing up, he was a truck driver for like a good 7-8 years. So seeing that kind of concept where they use semi trailers as this kind of community on wheels was really cool. Was really creative. It's not something that's in a game, so this is a completely original idea, and I can guarantee you none of us ever saw something like this in any form of media before.
Yeah, for sure.
And it definitely contributed a lot to this style that this episode was aiming for. Is that not everybody in this post-apocalyptic world is evil, has bad intentions, or ready to stab you in the back at a moment's notice. This is a really tight-knit community of people who are family, friends, and there's no issues going on here. It's really peaceful. And I think what really brings this community together is the character Granny.
Yes.
So we'll talk about more her here in a moment, but I think that her character introduction in this was fantastic. You really got to know her story in a single episode, because they normally take several episodes to like really establish a character, their backstory, their what their motives are. But we got all of that in this episode, and it had a very satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, I agree. I think, when I think filler episodes, I think that for a lot of people, the first thing you think of is like anime. So, like a show like One Piece, it's got over 1,000 episodes for a reason. They're not all moving that main story forward. Not the live action for all you weebs out there, the actual original OG. But obviously, like in a show like this, at some point you're going to have smaller episodes like this. And I think that, this is a great example of a great filler episode. Not all filler episodes are bad. But it's also very easy to mess them up because you almost kind of sit there finding yourself asking, okay, why should I care about any of this if it's here? I need reason to care. And I think Granny's character is a guiding force to why you should care about any of the characters, any of the convoy, this faction that, at this point, again, I've not watched any further into the season, so I've kind of just taken this the same approach that I took to Last of Us. I've only watched one episode before we record. I don't watch ahead typically, and these last episodes have made me want to, but I've avoided that. But again, like Granny and her character and her arc, it is the guiding force to what makes this a good filler episode. First of all, she's hysterical because she's a incredibly horny, incredibly sexually active old person, and I never imagined at 27, soon to be 28 years old, that I would find that entertaining. But her character was hysterical. I know Kyle, like Quiet, finds that book that she has and opens it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's got that depiction of her having sex while the dude while he's driving. And it's just one of those, like, you watch this with your parents, it might be uncomfortable, but just watching it by yourself, you're able to laugh at it a little bit.
Yeah, I also there's a lot of characters that so we haven't played all of the games enough. I mean, I played them as a kid. Matt played them as a kid, and well, I mean,
I want to play them.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, honestly, I'd like to see a new one come out. I think it'd be fun.
Yes.
But one thing that does kind of get lost on us a few times is the character cameos like Granny Dread. She's from the games, as well as Watts. And I honestly, it makes me want to go back and play the game so I can kind of appreciate these little cameos, but at the same time, it makes me happy for people who are huge fans of Twisted Metal because they got to see, one of the big characters, Granny Dread, and obviously her car. You get to see Watts and her, famous car, the Twister, which is that dragster that we haven't seen in action, but they did unveil it while they were on the convoy. But that's another thing I think that they really do a good job of putting these references in. And some of them are very, very on the nose. Like in the first episode, the copy of Twisted Metal that lands on the windshield. And in this one, when John Doe is looking at Watts' missiles on the wall, she outright says that they're out of your weight class, referencing, the weight class of his car, like the games. I thought that was pretty funny. Um, but yeah, they end up getting to see the florist, who I think is a very interesting character because she obviously knows some shit and she has seen some shit. Um, but when John Doe and Quiet first meet her, they're at her house, wondering where she's at, just kind of banging on the door, looking for her because they're trying to rush and get these meds so that way they can get back. She comes around the corner and she introduces herself and says, "I've got some tea. Would you like to partake in it?" So they do. And
none of us believed for a second that they should, by the way. I'm sure we were all doing the Leonardo DiCaprio, like pointing at the screen, like, nope, we know what's about to happen. We know what this is.
And man, the moment she started putting on her gloves and she said, "You've had refreshments, and now I have questions," I was like, I knew it. I knew she poisoned that shit. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting seeing someone use anything other than a gun or a knife in this world as a weapon. She used plants to paralyze them and get information out of them. Where
mixed it with tea.
Yeah, mixed it with
tea. Like, damn.
Most, if not all, of the people we have seen in this show have used some form of weaponry, such as a gun, a knife. I mean, the Sweet Tooth has that big machete thing. But she uses plants, which I think is very resourceful. And at the same time, in a post-apocalyptic world, that's something that's a replenishing resource. So I think she's smart. I think she's got some shit up her sleeve that could end up coming back in later seasons, and I would like to see her become a mainstay character because I think that she could add a lot. It's unfortunate she did not get a whole lot of time in this episode, but what she did get, I really liked of her character.
I agree, and the torture scene is up there as one of my favorite.
Oh yeah,
it's one of my favorite scenes. Like the poisoning scene, I should say, when Quiet pukes, and then John Doe is like, "Holy shit!" Quiet then pukes himself, and it's just hysterical.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the use of plants. She brings that one out, and it's one of the best lines I think for me in the whole show. Is she's like, to some people this plant feels like barbed wire. To others, it feels like 1,000 volts of electricity. I wonder what it'll feel like for you. And then she presses it against his skin, and it just leaves this gigantic burn mark almost. And it's just like, holy shit. First of all, what is this plant and where can I get some so I can use it for things that are not related to torture? FBI, that's a joke, I promise. We also mentioned how you see how some of her victims, you can see their body parts mixed in with the plants almost. That was kind of weird. Like that again, it was just a weird little detail. But again, it's character building. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the moment that she finds out that they're there for grandma, they're there, for medicine. She kind of, breaks them out. It's funny how she has to help John Doe chew that plant that's supposed to break the paralysis.
Yeah.
And then the first real character moment that we get here is they hand her the list of the things that they need for grandma, and she looks at one of them and she goes, "Huh. They've never requested that before," and she tells them this isn't going to make her better. This is more or less to ease the pain, and that's when you kind of get that realization of, oh shit, grandma isn't just sick, she is on death's door sick. But again, it's a great moment, and I think that again, if the show can build on those moments, I think it's going to keep improving. The one thing else, and Matt, we talked about this with the convoy. There's another new faction that's introduced in this episode, and we don't see a lot of them, but I think that their presence is very intriguing, and it certainly has me wondering if we're going to see them again, and I hope we do. Matt, talk about them a little bit more, because it's a really interesting faction. Religious factions are always they're a trope of post-apocalyptic source material. That's something that's that I think game after game, story after story goes after a lot, is religious zealots, and it's, when done well, it can be very, very powerful. I thought this new group was very terrifying, even though we don't see a lot of them at all, Matt.
Yeah, I think the fact that, just the sound of their bells ringing off in the distance and is enough to strike fear into people. It says a lot about them without actually even seeing them appear, make an appearance or, even getting an idea of what they're capable of. But the fact that they took a group of people, call them the Holy Man.
I think that's what they're called. Yeah.
Yeah, just like the name alone, you're kind of like, oh, I want to see what these guys are about because, I'm not saying religious people are crazy, but I think in a post-apocalyptic setting like this, they tend to be the craziest ones there are. Because I mean, what we had the Last of Us, where the religious people were, cannibals. So, I am very curious to see where they take, this new faction that we have, don't know anything about. But like I said, just previously, how the sound of the bells is just enough to get people scared. I'm really curious, what their story is. I'm really curious to know how they treat people out in the world, just if they're caught, just what they're capable of doing.
Well, and you mentioned the bells, and I think that was a really interesting because I think we all kind of know what a church bell sounds like. It's a very distinct sound.
Yeah.
The first time we hear it, it's when John Doe and Quiet are on their way to the florist. And, they hear it and they're like, okay, we should probably hurry up. Well, then as they go to leave, they hear it again. And Quiet's like, we can take them. And John Doe's like, no, not a chance. We're going to try to outrun them. And then it cuts to dark and they're, you see all of these vehicles following them. And they're probably about, a couple 100 feet behind them. Or, probably maybe a little bit further than that. That's a hard distance to judge from that angle. But John Doe kind of drops the exposition of, they've been following us for the last 50 miles. They're only getting closer. So they're able to pull over into this abandoned movie theater, and they're able to hide out. And again, you only hear the vehicles. You hear the sound of dudes laughing. We don't get a lot of the Holy Men. We don't get a lot of context around them. But we get just enough to make them a terrifying group. And I think that was really well done. So then, Matt, that leads to another great character scene, and that's the one with Quiet and John Doe in the movie theater. And I'll let you talk a little bit about that, because that was an excellent scene with both Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatriz.
Oh, yeah. This is the kind of scene that when you're going to do a filler episode, this is the kind of, story building that I'd like to see, because these two characters have been at each other's throats almost the whole entire series, and we're only on episode 4, so just kind of getting this more human side of them. They're just sitting in the movie theater watching a silent movie, and because there's no noise, there's no voice acting, there's no music or anything like that, they're just creating it for themselves. And John Doe opens up about how this was, something that he loved to go see movies. And then, Quiet was talking about how her brother would go see movies, and she, they would sneak in and go. That was one of their things that they did to bond. And this really shows a lot of what Quiet's character is about, because, early on in the show, she loses her brother to, what's his face? What's his name?
The cop. You talking about the sheriff or whatever?
Yeah, the sheriff, Agent Stone.
Same thing. The sheriff, Agent Stone, same thing, different shape.
So because takes his life and everything. So she still holds on to her brother. So those memories, and she opens up to John Doe about that. And I think that it's a really good bonding moment. It's a really good character development for what's currently going on in the series. So it's just a little bit laid back. It's not so much action, but it's really just that character development, that that building with that relationship between them, because we're going to see more of this in the coming episodes. But it was one of those things that was just really touching to see, because you don't really see a lot of that in shows like this. So just the fact that we were given that, even though it didn't, it was very brief, but it really hit a home run when it comes to actually starting to feel like you want these characters to succeed in what they're doing, because you can see that humanness side to them.
Well, yeah, and I think that I can't remember, I think it was someone talking about Left Behind for Last of Us, when you see Riley take Ellie to this mall, and they get on the carousel and they play with all the masks. That's that's in a post-apocalyptic world, you forget very quick that you're a human, and that you sometimes need to just let loose and relax a little bit. And I think that it's why we don't see a lot of that in post-apocalyptic shows and movies is that side is often forgotten. That at the end of the day, these are humans. They are human beings that, they have senses of humor, they have emotions. That it's not just all gone to shit just because the world around them has. So I think that this episode did a good job of portraying that. Kyle, one last really memorable moment before we call this an episode is obviously when they get back to Grandma and they give her the medicine and she ends up passing on. Let's talk about her funeral for a second, because it looks like a really touching Twisted Metal version of a Viking funeral. And then the show reminds you that it's Twisted Metal, and it's one of the funniest moments in this show yet.
Yeah, so when she died, the next day Watts was given a speech talking about how, before the fall, before the apocalypse began, she was this great realtor, and she was a platinum club member of some restaurant, and she was just this badass who did all this crazy shit. And then when everything went to hell, she became Granny Dread. And I think it was a very touching moment, like you said, because it really shows that Watts cares for her in sort of this, mother-daughter relationship. I don't know if it's confirmed that they are actually related. Everybody just kind of calls her Granny. But it was almost sad seeing them lose this, this mother figure to all of them, because now she's saying, it's time for you all to go on your own and, remember everything I've taught you. And there was one very special moment that her and Watts had right before she went, where she said that the most important thing in this world is time spent with your loved ones. And she told her not to let some silly argument ruin an entire, relationship. And after that, you end up seeing Watts uncover her car, and she pulls out this radio, the CB radio that's hooked up to it, and she actually radios the florist, and so they get talking again. So that was a touching moment. I like I said, I really liked how almost all of this episode did a great job in humanizing everyone it showed, and not just saying, hey, they're trying to survive, so this is why they are. It gave another layer to these characters all the way up until the very end, where they let down the back of the semi as they're moving, and they just they put Granny's car in neutral and rolled it out the back with her in it. And everybody's just kind of saying their goodbyes as we watch the semi, get further and further away. And then Watts hits a detonator that blows the entire fucking car up with, Granny's body inside of it. Really an epic way to go out, but that was 100% the, come back to Twisted Metal reality. They remember what show you're watching. And, it was funny, because I totally was just wondering, I was like, are they just going to leave her there? Because, what if somebody comes by and just takes her car? And nope, they sent it with her, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, and then after that, we obviously see Quiet and John Doe entertain the idea of staying with the convoy, but then Quiet's reminded of why she started traveling with John Doe in the first place, and it's because she has, it out for Agent Stone. And so this episode ends on a good note. I think there was a small spat that Quiet and John Doe had earlier, but they kind of resolved it. And overall, I think that this is a very heartwarming episode. It felt, very outside of Twisted Metal almost, which I liked, because like we said in the beginning of this episode, it's not just cussing and humor and raunchiness. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's proof that this show can tell a story. It's proof that this show can tell a coherent, good, emotional story, and that's good. I mean, that's not something I expected from Twisted Metal, so I'm incredibly pleased with that. And it sets up for some interesting stuff further down the road. Will we see more of the Holy Men? Will we see more of the convoy? Will any of these loose threads matter? Obviously, you guys already know because you've watched all the show. I haven't, so I'm asking a question really just to the void. But But this is a good filler episode. Really, really pleased with it. Excited for episode 5 for sure, but we're going to review that next week. So that's going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For the boys, for Matt, for Kyle, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.